So welcome everyone to today's webinar on writing proposals. My name is Claire Moffett and I am a member of the HU Atmospheric Sciences Early Career Committee, and I'm going to be moderating today. To start, I just want to draw everyone's attention to a seminar series we're also hosting next week on climate extremes. So we'll put the registration link for that in the chat. That should be really interesting. And then I also ask that if you have questions for our panelists, just put them in the chat and then I will communicate them to the panelists. So if everyone who is a participant can just make sure that you are muted, that would be great. So to start, I'll ask our panelists to each just introduce themselves, give a little brief summary of how they got to where they are in their career and what their research interests are. So why don't we start with Lilia?
Sure. Thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. I'm Lilia Hawkins. I'm a faculty member at Harvey Mudd College, which is in Claremont, California. Mudd is a small STEM-focused liberal arts college that's one of 5 undergraduate colleges in the Claremont Colleges Consortium. I was hired in 2011 to the chemistry department of Harvey Mudd following my doctoral work at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in Climate and Aerosol Chemistry, and a postdoc at the University of San Diego for 1 year in chemistry. And then in 2021, I was awarded a dual appointment with our new Hickson Center for Climate and the Environment as it launched that year. And I now serve as the first director of that center, which means these days I'm doing more administrative work, such as hiring other faculty and developing curriculum for our new majors, and a little bit less teaching than my earlier years at Mudd. My research training and longtime focus is on atmospheric aerosol chemical composition and the connections between that composition and aerosol optical properties, transformation, and formation of particles, especially as it relates to climate. In my time as an aerosol scientist, I've contributed to very large field campaigns like shipboard measurements, for example, as well as collaborative international laboratory studies on aerosol cloud interactions. And I've even conducted small campaigns at Harvey Mudd with just me and my own undergraduates. And while my graduate work was focused on the climate implications of aerosol forcing and aerosol cloud interactions, I'm now really interested in the intersection between climate and air quality as it relates to the unequal burden of both low-income and historically underserved communities with those impacts.
Great, thank you. Hannah, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Horowitz. I am an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I started there about 4 years ago, following completing my PhD at Harvard in Earth and Planetary Science, and then a postdoc at the University of Washington in Atmospheric Science and their cooperative institute with the NOAA PMEL lab there. So my research is focused on modeling atmospheric chemistry, specifically interested in the interactions between climate change and air quality and aerosols and climate interactions as well, but from more of a 3D global modeling perspective. And I've also dabbled a bit in understanding the unintended consequences of climate intervention, whether that's something like marine cloud brightening or atmospheric methane removal and those implications for air quality as well. Yeah, I also have a joint appointment in the Atmospheric Science Department at the University of Illinois.
Great. Cameron, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Cameron Homeyer. I'm an associate professor and the interim director of the School of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. I've been here for 10 years. Prior to that, I did a postdoc at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, and completed my degrees at Texas A&M University in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences there. My work is predominantly in the field of upper troposphere, lower stratosphere studies, focus a lot on stratosphere-troposphere exchange events, which is a compound problem between weather and chemistry and climate. And since coming to OU, I've fallen into a lot of severe storms research, mainly focused on severe storm climatology work, large data sets on that side. So that is where most of my research is in. Of course, Layla, I'm also an administrator now, so I do a lot of my work in that space, though I am able to maintain a lot of active research work periodically as able between the main surges in academic life, which is starting here in another 2 weeks. But yeah, I've had a lot of experience in this realm, and I'm happy to hopefully provide some meaningful guidance and support.
Thank you. And then Yue.
Hi everyone, I'm Yue Zhang. I'm an assistant professor from Texas A&M Department of Atmospheric Sciences. So I had before I joined A&M, so I had my PhD at Harvard, and then so Hannah and I, we actually knew each other when we were both PhD students there. And then afterwards, I took an NSF postdoc fellowship that's jointly appointed between UNC Chapel Hill, MIT, and Aerodyne to work on aerosol-related work. So, and I was also the Access member as well. So for my research part, I'm mainly doing experiments and field measurements with some of the simple modeling work to look at air quality and aerosol chemistry, and also different parts of aerosol cloud interactions. So my research involves using a laboratory environmental chamber to look at the evolution of these volatile organic compounds and how they form secondary organic aerosols. We also use mobile lab to deploy at different parts of the state and the country to look at some emerging pollutants, including PFAS and volatile chemical products and micro nanoplastics. We're also looking at how these aerosol particles can affect the ice nucleation and the hygroscopicity of themselves, which will impact cloud formation. So these are different parts of my research. I'm really happy here to share with everyone of some of the, I guess, lessons and tips I learned from applying for research proposals.
Thank you all for those wonderful introductions. So now we'll start with a couple prepared questions we have. So if you're in the audience, please feel free to post any questions you have for our panelists in the chat, and then we'll communicate those to the panelists. So to start off, just for someone who maybe has never written a grant before or is new, starting off, how would you recommend they identify finding grants to apply to? Are there specific agencies that maybe you lean towards? Would anyone like to start?
Yeah, I was going to say that well, I just started at my lab. So looking for the research proposal to submit to which a grant is always challenging because there are a lot and I wasn't super familiar with everything yet. But I would say maybe talking to any colleagues or faculty within your department will be for sure a huge help, because at the same time, they can provide some of their past research proposals or grants opportunities that you can look for. And then there are also different types of research grants that some are actually open all year round. They can apply anytime. And a lot of them, or most of them, are actually only due within a very short window, maybe like 2 months time. So looking at it when it's just released is quite important, because that's going to help you prepare for it, in my standpoint. So I think if you, if anyone is familiar with grants.gov, so that's a good website which lists most of the federal grants. So you can sign up for newsletters there with research fields that's relevant to you, and then you can just, if you receive any notification, you can start applying.
Yeah, the only element I would add to that is a lot of agencies like NSF or NASA or DOE, so on and so forth. They have agency mailing lists that you can sign up for and get specific notifications when a solicitation or an opportunity opens. And that I found to be helpful early on. At my institution, our Office of Research Services similarly propagates new opportunities to the entire faculty every week. So I get far more than I can digest, but there are multiple ways to receive the information, and talking to colleagues is a really great way to filter it down.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. University of Illinois has a very similar weekly email of opportunities, and they also have someone in the College of Engineering where like every year you kind of update them with your current research interests so they can try to filter it a bit for you in advance of kind of what fits your area. So definitely, you know, depending on where you are, you might have something like that. And then some agencies, the calls, the solicitations tend to come out around the same time every year. It's not exact, but if you kind of keep that in mind, you know, like NASA Roses is always kind of around Valentine's Day every year. Obviously, there's updates that happen throughout the year, but kind of just remembering the general timelines can be helpful. And DOE as well kind of has similar times of year. But then again, like it was said, NSF is kind of all the time in many programs. But yeah, definitely talking to colleagues and just, you know, getting people to know in what you're interested in, then they can forward opportunities to you directly that they happen to hear about. And then, you know, I haven't done much of this, but there are some more like philanthropic organizations that fund research in my area. So you can definitely get on those kinds of email lists. And again, that I think you get a sense of what those organizations are in your field by talking to people, and, you know, going to conferences and seeing, you know, sometimes funders will be there and just kind of learning about non federal opportunities that way.
Yeah, I think my list includes everything that everyone has said already. And I would just add to the importance of the staff support on your campus. If you have someone who works in the federal grants office or the foundation relations office, as Hannah was suggesting, maybe even like take them to lunch or coffee and get to know them and talk about your research with them if it's that kind of environment. We're a small campus, so this is normal for us to do these kinds of things. Because when you're successful, then their office is successful too. And so they can keep an eye out. And also you don't have to wait for them to send you opportunities. You can tell them that you are actively looking for funding in an area, and that might trigger some additional support. One final tip could be to look at the funding that's stated in any papers you're reading that are relevant to your research. You can see is it just NSF? Are all the papers coming from the same agency, or are there a variety of agencies that maybe you've never even heard of? Because those are always going to be reported in the literature. So that's an extra tip.
That is a really great tip that I hadn't thought of, Lilia. So thank you for that. So the next question is a bit broad, so you know, do your best to handle it. How do you come up with your ideas for what you would like to focus your proposal on, especially for someone who's maybe starting their lab and has a lot of different places they'd like to start? How would you narrow down what you actually want to write about?
This was a hard one for me to answer because I tried to reflect on this. I don't think I have a distinct method. I think all the ideas that I pursued have been a natural byproduct of my personal research, reading that I've done, the conferences, you know, talks that I've seen and attended that have inspired or motivated me, and teaching. And ultimately all those opportunities help to shape what I identify to be a really important problem that needs to be addressed. So I'd say that the only recipe that I could come up with is identify an important and interesting problem, something that you're going to really want to work on. Clearly define the gaps in understanding for that problem, and devise a strategy that builds upon your skills and past experience to increase understanding and to resolve a gap that you identify. It's the sort of universal recipe that I could come up with.
I was thinking about this as sort of two types of proposals I might write. So one might follow on naturally from a study I've just finished, the remaining open questions. And in that case, I will generally have a good sense of the field, the weaknesses or the open questions in that field, and what's an obvious next step. So then my brainstorming process really focuses on how many years of funding is this? How many students will I be training? I work with undergraduates, it's just me and them. And so I have to be really careful about scoping the size of the project and the equipment that we might need. So that's one category, but the other category is something where I feel like I'm branching out. Recently, I put in a proposal for a slightly pivot. And in that case, the brainstorming process started with an open mind and lots of reading and trying to think about what my higher level goal was to have a positive impact on a community, for example. What is it that I can contribute with my skill set to achieve a positive impact, and then leaving the middle open while I read a lot of papers and actually talked to people. I emailed some of the authors. I reached out to AQMD to see how they've been working with communities. And it turned out that I needed to pivot from what we originally thought we were going to do. And so that's actually, my advice for later. But I think just keeping an open mind and making sure that your brainstorming and your plans are not developed in a bubble. You want to make sure that it's really clear to people outside your narrow field that it's an important and needed study and that you're capable of doing it.
Yeah, I completely agree about the bubble issue. And I mean, obviously the pandemic kind of made some of this a bit more complicated, but I really find conferences really help with this for me because it's obviously you need to delve into literature after, but you get kind of a good overview of, okay, where is everything at right now? And you can talk to all the people there and just really, get inspired and also make sure that what is currently going on, because a lot of times at conferences maybe things haven't yet been published, so you can kind of see where things are going and is this already something that somebody is really far along working on, or is there an opportunity to collaborate with somebody? But obviously it's not always possible to attend tons of conferences, especially early in my time as a professor, but that's something I think in an ideal world I like doing that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I also agree with Leah's comment about there are two types of proposals. So when I look at research call or some research interest I have, I would first look at whether this could be submitted to any open call, which means that as long as it's something you're passionate about, you can write a proposal, or this call or solicitation has a specific goal in, like EPA or NASA. They normally has very specific agency goals or requirement that you have to fulfill. So I would say that for me, I found it's a little bit easier for people who write their first proposal to submit to one that's a little bit more open call, because that's something you already know some ideas you're passionate about, and then you don't have to be confined or tailored towards that specific funding agency's goal. That's a general sense. It's not really applicable for everyone. For my first proposal that I was serving as a lead PI was NSF, because I was very excited about one idea, and I knew that I can submit to NSF at any time, and it would be open to all kinds of ideas. So I would say that's one of my small recommendation or suggestion comments. Another thing is that there are also different types of proposals regarding single PI or multiple collaborative proposals. If it's a single PI proposal, then it's really all about your idea and how you fulfill the funding agency's role. But if it's multiple collaborative proposal, then you just need to find out all the collaborators that you can work with and that can be complementary. And then maybe it's nice to sit down or have a Zoom meeting so everyone can discuss about how they can contribute. So that's another way that we typically write proposals for this larger multi-collaborative proposals.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll move on to some audience questions. We've gotten a couple in the chat. So the first one is, does the number of papers you have published affect the likelihood of writing a successful proposal? Do you think there's any correlation there?
I mean, I can share a little bit of my personal thinking on this. I think when you write a proposal, so normally the reviewers are going to review it and then essentially provide evaluations for the program manager to decide. So the reviewers' viewpoints are mostly about whether this proposal has a good idea and also whether this proposal can be potentially carried out by the team proposing it. So having publications in this relevant field for sure would help a lot because it would provide you credentials that will convince the reviewer that you can get this work done. But on the other hand, I think for a lot of early career folks, I mean, I guess including us, when we apply, I think the reviewers would also understand that your early career, they wouldn't require you to have a tremendous amount of publications like a very senior full professor, but having some publications or some experience in the area you're proposing for, I personally think would be beneficial to have the proposal be funded.
One thing that I think I wasn't as aware of until I started as a faculty member was, having the importance for some agencies of having preliminary results in the proposal or just some kind of preliminary data. So it's almost like you've kind of started working on it a little bit and then you write the proposal, which didn't maybe make as much sense in my head, but that is another way to kind of prove that you're going to be able to complete it because you kind of can show maybe just a couple figures or, show some results, very preliminary results that you have on your way to getting that done. So it maybe isn't published yet, or maybe especially if it's a newer area for you that you're moving into, but you can show, I ran this model just as a test case and I can show that, but I need the funding to complete the full study. So I think, in the absence of a publication in that area that's like very specifically related, you can show maybe a bit more preliminary data or results.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on your career stage. And I mean, the NSF, for example, reviewer questions don't ask reviewers to weigh in on the number of publications, just the appropriateness or the preparation for the scientist to do this work, which can be demonstrated in a number of ways. The program officer will have a record of your funding and the products from those, and that different program officers may feel differently about how much they want to weigh that. So I guess I would say don't be daunted, but if you have previous funding from an organization, it's probably wise to try to get things out the door, or close to out the door as you're submitting new proposals. I think over time they probably won't want to continue supporting someone who's taking funds and not producing publications with them. But for more junior colleagues, I don't think one should be too intimidated by that.
It was all well said. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, great. So the next question is about if there's ever a possibility or if it's possible to go directly to a funding agency or a program manager and propose an idea directly to them and ask for funding.
I think this tends to happen a lot of times in preparation of certain field projects. Sometimes this can be coordinated with program managers directly, or if there's an emerging need, like for example the Hunga Tonga eruption. There's a lot of interest in having a sort of emergent rapid response to that, and sometimes in those situations, communicating directly with program managers can open pathways to new opportunities, but it's highly dependent on the program manager and the agency and their ability to do some of those things under the confines of their budget. Most agencies, the vast majority of their budget is already heavily committed to existing programs and practices, so sometimes they don't have mechanisms to do this, but yes, it is possible, but I'd say in the grand scheme of things, it's rare relative to the typical process.
Each time I've submitted a proposal, I've started with a one-page summary and a budget to my program officer, letting them know that I'm thinking of applying and this is the general outline and would this be appropriate for the call or is there feedback? And I've usually gotten really positive and helpful feedback from those conversations. And there was even for a new program, an open office hours that the program officers held where they wanted to give information about this new type of call and hear what people were thinking of proposing and give feedback. And so I would take advantage of both scheduled and, by request interactions with the program officer. I'm not sure I call either of those lobbying, but it's certainly an opportunity to for them to put a face to your name and to hear you describe with excitement what you'd like to do. And so that might give you a better chance going into the next phase when you have a full proposal submitted.
I also agree with that. So when I was a postdoc, the advice I received from other senior faculty, which I want to share with everyone here, is that when you meet with a program manager, I think it's normally recommended to prepare a one-pager to talk about all the ideas as Leo mentioned, and also how the implications of it or the significance. I normally email the program manager of my one-pager first, so they can review it before I schedule a meeting with them. I feel that's a good use of their time. Also shows that I've been putting lots of efforts on thinking of this research proposal that I want to do. So it normally comes out well. But if you are actually going to a research conference and if you see a program manager, I think the situation is a little bit more casual. So maybe you can just reach out to them and share with your idea more verbally. And the other thing I want to share is that it depends on different university. I know that quite a few universities, including A&M here, so we normally send younger faculty to visit other funding agencies and program managers just for like 2-3 days time. So we all fly to DC or somewhere we choose and then meet a few program managers who are interested. But that's also a great chance that you can meet them in person one by one and then talk about all the research ideas you have after sharing with them the one-pager. So if your university has this type of, activities, I would encourage everyone to sign up for it. That's quite helpful.
Okay, great. So then the next question is, if you're a postdoc working in a PI's group, should you apply for funding? Should you begin applying for funding? And if you do, should you apply with the assistance of the PI or submit with the PI?
I would say this is going to depend a lot on the university. Some universities don't allow postdocs to be PIs and have their own funding because it's a temporary position, and depending on the university, you might be able to take that funding to your next position if you were to move, and other universities can be more strict about it. So I would definitely look into what people at your university do. So in the case where maybe the postdoc can't be the PI, but if your supervisor is, really supportive, they might still allow you to take that funding with you after you leave. I've seen that happen before at my previous institutions. So I think, just be careful about that as far as, how much effort you're putting into it if it doesn't actually have your name on it. But if it is open, then I would say the best thing, if you are allowed to be the lead PI, then I would probably do it without your current supervisor, would probably be my piece of advice. I don't know if anyone has other thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to, so I had some experience while I was a postdoc about applying for grants. I mean, it's always a tricky question, right? Because on the postdoc side, you want to publish your own research papers as first authors, and these are quite important for your postdoc career. But you also want to get a sense of how the funding application works, and so to prepare for your next stage. So I would say I would normally think that when I was doing my postdoc for my first year, I was mostly focusing on the research part to get the publications out. But then once I started to have more bandwidth and start get more familiar with the lab on the second year, so I was actually just try to help with proposal application of at that time my postdoc mentor at that time. And then I think I didn't even ask for to be a PI or co-PI because I think at UNC at that time they will not allow postdoc to be a lead PI. But my postdoc advisor was just offering, say, hey, do you want to be a co-PI on this because you actually help contribute. And he was also very nice, saying that if the proposal is funded in the future, I move to a new location, I can also take that part of the funding that I serve as a co-PI. So I was very happy for that, but that proposal wasn't actually eventually get funded, but it did provide me a good experience to learn that how to write proposals and how to also prepare for the budget and how all this works, because no one would actually really teach that unless you participate. So I would recommend, even if you're not serving as a co-PI or PI, but going through the experience itself is for sure worth it. And then the other thing is that I think if you have other opportunity to apply for fellowship, that's also nice, because NSF has this postdoc fellowship, which you will be the only single lead PI as a postdoc. That's going to also give you lots of flexibility. I think our college recently has a policy that the postdoc can start to apply for some actual funding to use this to write a proposal as a co-PI. And then we were all very supportive of it. So I think generally faculty members should be quite supportive as long as you complete all the work you need to do, but have actual time to work on the proposal. I think that's a good way to educate the next generation in that sense.
Okay. So then the next question was, once you have selected, the proposal that you plan to write, the agency to submit it to, how do you know how to organize your proposal that you're writing, and where would you start with writing that proposal?
I'll give a NSF specific answer. Since I have reviewed proposals a number of times for NSF, I take the questions that are sent to reviewers, which should be available through NSF anyway, and I put them in the draft document, and all the special extra questions that might go with that call. Proposals must explain X, Y, or Z. I put them all in the draft document, and I try to create an outline that very, very clearly maps onto the questions the reviewers are going to get. So you don't have to make extra work for the reviewers trying to find evidence of the significance of your proposal, evidence that you're going to be successful. It's kind of like, the best students will restate the question before they answer it on exams. I think it's really important in the proposals to make sure that whatever the call asks you to demonstrate, that you've done it really clearly and using the same language. And proposals, the proposal guidelines will often give you a natural outline to follow. And you can always ask a colleague who's had successful proposals to look at their proposal and see how they organized it. I think clearly defined sections with lots of space, and not trying to jam text in all of the 15 pages, for example, NSF is a wise approach, because a lot of people who are reading them are going to be skimming and looking for evidence that these are successful or not, and so you want to make that easy as possible.
Yeah, I agree with every single point there. My general recommendation in this strategy is usually to draft with a universal goal of reducing perceived risk. Reviewers are going to look for opportunities for your project to fail or holes in it that they can justify as means to not support a proposal, because there are just simply more proposals that are submitted than it's capable of funding. So weaknesses are often the big target, and strengths are equally valued in that context. So making your narrative clear and emphatically defining the existing needs, what your important problem is, key gaps in understanding, fundamental goals of the work. Organization helps a lot with this. Bold facing your main goals and objectives, where necessary, to call out these things. A general rule that I try to follow is on every page of the proposal, have some clear reminder of what a goal is or where we're heading with a particular project, because the short-term memory is a big problem when you're reading lots and lots of proposals as a reviewer. So, remind them frequently of these things. And don't be afraid to provide clear, well-justified details on how a project will be executed, even if you foresee it being possible that those details might change. What you're doing is conveying that you've thought deeply and carefully about a problem, and you have a plan, a well-constructed plan. The point about having preliminary proof of concept work, I think, is really, really important, especially if there is not a good model for the project that you've designed in the peer-reviewed literature. That becomes very, very important. And the last thing I would say is discuss your anticipated results and how they will advance understanding or fulfill the goals of your project before you get to the end of the text, and outline potential challenges or weaknesses that you expect someone might see in your designed proposal, and then specifically address how you would deal with those challenges or weaknesses if they became a reality, because that again helps to demonstrate that you've thought of problems that you might encounter, and you also have a plan for navigating those challenges and ultimately increasing the likelihood of success of the proposed effort.
Yeah, and I would echo definitely trying to get your hands on past successful proposals. If you don't know anyone personally, it's possible your university has at least I know for like career grants and things, University of Illinois every year has workshops on that where they will openly share whoever got a career who's willing to share their proposals. So you can look through those in different offices. They also have mock career panel reviews. So I think another really great way to know how to write a good proposal is to review proposals. So getting in touch with program managers and offering your services as a reviewer. It might not happen right away. So if your university does have this kind of like mock review, that can also be a really good opportunity to look at, several different proposals at once and see kind of how they do things differently, but maybe why each one in its own right ended up being successful. And yeah, the point of, having exact wording of any required sections in the proposal, which will vary depending on the agency. Sometimes you have to have a section that literally says these words in it. Just don't reinvent the wheel then. Just use those words exactly as it says in the the proposal instruction document. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everyone in the sense of having join the review and being a reviewer for sure would really help you to understand what the funding agency needs. Each funding agency is a bit different, so the way people write the proposal to each funding agency includes certain specific keywords or points that are just essentially being very well received by certain funding agencies. So being a reviewer, you can understand what they're mostly looking for from the other end. That's for sure helps a lot. The other thing is about there is actually an NSF geosciences workshop that's for young faculty. I really recommend anyone who is actually younger faculty or junior faculty to join. In the process, it not only teaches about teaching and research, but everyone will need to write a little bit of research proposal. So everyone forms like a cohort, try to improve each other's research proposal in that sense. And I really like that workshop a lot because it really helps you to understand from everyone else's aspect how your proposals are constructed. So that's something I want to recommend to all the people here.
Those are great answers. Thank you. So our next question is about budgeting. when you're writing your proposal. So they were specifically interested in when you're writing your budget, how would you decide whether to ask for funds for a postdoc or a PhD student?
Yeah, it's always hard, right? Because I think for PhD, they will stay in the lab a little bit longer, right? So and then postdoc, generally, they can get more hands-on faster because they don't have to take classes initially. So I think there are both pros and cons. In it, I normally, as a younger professor early on, I would prioritize with a little bit more PhD students because you do need to get your lab running. In that sense, you need to have longer sustained funding to support your students to graduate. But once I have enough students in the lab, so I would start to maybe prioritize a little bit more over both postdoc and students, because in that sense, postdocs can also, it's a nice education experience. I really enjoy working with my postdocs. But in the meantime, they can also work with younger students and try to mentor them, so they also gain some education and teaching experience from this. So I think it's a win-win. So that's how I think, and also it depends on proposal. Certain funding agencies, the budget is just not there, and it's probably not enough to recruit a postdoc for longer term. So I would probably provide more for students. And later on, if there's a second proposal I'm working on that has a little bit more budget, then I will probably prioritize more with postdoc, so it evens out.
Okay, unless anybody else has something to add there. The next question is, have you learned any lessons from any proposals that you submitted that have been rejected? Is there anything that you think others could benefit from hearing?
I'd say most of the general advice that I shared is based on projections or reviews or comments that I've gotten and things I've learned along the way on what makes the difference between a certain project getting selected or declined. Yeah, I think you often learn about areas in which maybe you overlook certain important details that a reviewer is going to expect to see. You learn to focus and prioritize on including that in future proposals. Like I mentioned before, the need for proof of concept analysis is one that is sometimes not easy to recognize on how important that's going to be from a reviewer perspective, but you get better at that over time, and the declines usually help guide that a lot. And then recognizing potential weaknesses or challenges that you would encounter, the more proactively you think about that and include that as something that you address, I think the more well-rounded the proposal's gotten. I learned a lot about including that as a key emphasis in my proposals over the years.
I think some of what I've learned is there's some, I think I've struggled sometimes to try to fit my proposal into a solicitation where it doesn't actually fit. And so I think talking to the program managers, both before and after, if it is rejected, definitely talk to the program managers if you can afterwards, because you might get additional insights on top of the reviews themselves. So I think just, learning to recognize, what are actually the priorities of the funding agency if it has a very specific solicitation, and is this idea ever going to fit into that, or should I just kind of move on and find a different avenue for this idea? If I think this idea is really important and I want to pursue it, maybe I need to, pivot to some other funding source. But yeah, I think, for specific things, I agree. You kind of learn about, okay, these details were missing, or, I thought I had explained this clearly, but maybe I needed to have another person, kind of an additional person, read this over again. Definitely asking for colleagues to read over your proposal drafts and things like that. But sometimes, maybe you're doing things last minute and you add a new section or something, you're like, oh, sometimes figures can be really helpful in just, workshopping those with your colleagues of like how to very clearly present things in a way that's easier for someone who's skimming through a bunch of proposals to see.
I would also like to add that I think from what I know, from other faculty, every faculty will have their proposal at some point rejected, right? So just don't take it as, somewhere it's not good, but maybe it's a good opportunity for you to improve the science even more, so it's more robust. And then when you get a proposal funded in the future, then that's going to be making even better science and organization out of this. So that's how I view if a proposal, was not the results I would expect. But yeah, talking to program manager for sure helps. And then a lot of times, as Hannah already mentioned, they provide lots of information, and then you can just address the review comments, and then resubmit to next year or next cycle. That's the advice I'll give.
Yeah, some institutions even have the opportunity to hire an outside sort of expert at pre-review proposals. So Harvey Mudd, maybe 10 years ago now, paid for the services of an outside agency to read over proposals before they were submitted and kind of give that feedback that felt to me as a new PI, like the type of feedback I would have gotten on a rejected proposal, that first set of feedback. So it sort of saved me around in a way, and the expert had a lot of great suggestions. One of them I think Cameron mentioned, which is having a plan for things that might go wrong and what you'll do, backup, plan B, plan C, how you'll address those was one of the key things I didn't have. And then making sure to emphasize the significance of the findings that you anticipate was another area where I had to add some strength. And so, again, you may have a proposal that's totally appropriate for a call, but just didn't rise to the top of a bunch. It could be an excellent proposal and the program officer didn't have enough funding that year, or it could be inappropriate for that funding call. And you should really talk to the program officer to figure that out, because you don't want to waste time in an area that's not relevant, but also you don't want to be discouraged prematurely if you just need to revise and try again.
Yeah, I totally agree with Leah on that. Regarding the proposal can be really good, there can be just not enough funding. For one of the panel review I was on, so it looks like there were quite many proposals submitted, but due to the budget, there may be only like top 1 or top 2 can get selected. But sometimes the top 5 are all really good. So yeah, I don't want everyone to get discouraged. It could be due to many reasons.
Great, thank you for those answers. So the next question, I know Yui touched on it a bit. He mentioned the NSF workshop, but are there any other resources, either online or that you found through your university or workshops, that you think are very helpful when proposal writing?
So some universities, they normally host proposal preparation workshops for those larger funding agencies. Let's say for NSF career, for DOE early career, I know that there are different workshops at different universities. So these are recommended, I think, to go. And then the other one is American Chemical Society, ACS. They also have I guess early career workshop. So it covers part of the proposal writing, but also regarding like a publication and faculty application. That one is very good for anyone who is a postdoctoral fellow who wants to be a faculty. So I recommend that one as well.
Yeah, I think I would be on the lookout for what your university has to offer. Like I mentioned, there's like a lot of, and as you guys said, for the NSF career, they'll have like, different workshops on, okay, your education component of the NSF career, and they'll have panelists, and then, you can also spend time working with others as you're kind of brainstorming ideas and workshopping your ideas and things like that. But yeah, I also think just getting your hands on some recent successful proposals is really helpful. Also, if you're trying to figure out where to submit for something like NSF, where it's oftentimes unsolicited and there's a lot of different programs, you can see all the past grants that have been funded in different programs, and that also gives you a sense of kind of the typical budgets that get funded, the types of work that's being funded under different programs, and that can kind of give you a sense of where to get started for that, because different programs have different priorities.
Okay, and as we're coming up on the end of the hour, I'll ask one more question. What is your best piece of advice for somebody who's maybe writing their first proposal or newer to proposal writing?
I'll just say one thing that I often suggest to early career faculty is to prioritize collaborating with experienced PIs early on. In addition to getting successful proposals, working with them through the process of writing your first proposal or one of your first proposals is an excellent experience to learn about some things that they do that are based on their past experiences and success, and ultimately to increase your awareness of the important elements that are going to lead to the successful awards of your own independent efforts.
I can repeat what I already gave away earlier, which was just avoid the sort of idea bubble and make sure that your project and your scientific questions are really well rooted in the current work of your field, and that you can point to other recent studies saying that these are open questions in your field. And if you don't feel that alignment between the open questions, your proposed work, and the goals of the funding agency, that could be a sign that you need to take a step back and adjust one of those components. So just don't be afraid to pivot slightly, and don't get tunnel vision.
Yeah. It's hard to come up with one piece of advice. So I would say you just have to start writing something down. I think for me, the hardest part is just getting started and getting the ideas on the page. So just not being afraid to just get everything out there, and then you can work on narrowing it down and doing the additional research that you need. But I think just getting all the ideas out of your head first, and then there's then kind of trying to get them more detailed. You don't have to have a perfectly formed idea and plan just right off the bat. And so just getting whatever you have out first and then working on refining that.
I would also like to add that maybe if you can write early, that's also, from my experience, I feel that's helpful, because there are just also lots of other things besides writing the scientific proposal. You also have to create a budget and create all the facilities statement, your bio sketch. These are all the things that are attached with the proposal that have submitted all at the same time. So preparing early will help to give you enough time to prepare for all the other documents, especially if it's your first time submitting, because it can be quite daunting. And then the other thing is it can also provide time. If you have it done, you can send to your university proposal development people or send to a senior faculty to let them review it for you and point out any comments they have, so you have time to revise it. So I think that'll be something I found helpful for myself.
Great, thank you all for those really insightful answers. So as we're almost at the end of the hour, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for their answers and their time. We'll be putting some contact information for the Early Career Committee in the chat, as well as a poll for today's attendees to get feedback on today's webinar, or if you have ideas for future content you'd like to see from the committee, you can leave those thoughts there. And thank you all very much for your time. We hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thank you, everyone. I also put my email there in case any of you have any additional questions. You can reach out later.
Good luck, everyone.
Yeah.